Dr. Thomas Grant is an experienced therapist who has worked for many years, helping people overcome their emotional and psychological problems. With more than 1,000 patients under his care, Dr. Grant feels he is experienced enough to handle a wide variety of cases. However, there is something different about this patient, Daniel Carter. Daniel entered the therapy room with heavy steps, as if carrying an invisible burden. His body looked tired, his face was full of tension lines, and his eyes looked empty, as if he no longer knew where to find a way out. As they shook hands, Dr. Grant could feel the tension in Daniel's grip. Without saying a word, Daniel sat down in the chair provided, looking down, not knowing where to start. "How can I help you, Daniel?" asked Dr. Grant in a calm voice, trying to give his patient space to open up. Daniel stared down for a few seconds before finally lifting his face, looking at Dr. Grant with eyes full of anxiety. "I'm stuck in something I know is wrong," Daniel replied softly. "A relationship that shouldn't be happening." Dr. Grant waited, giving him time to speak further. He knew, as usual, that patients came with a variety of personal problems that were difficult to express. However, he was ready to listen. "I'm involved in a relationship with a married woman," Daniel continued, his tone full of guilt. "At first, it was just simple conversation. We talked about ordinary things, work, everyday life. But then, over time, I started to feel more deeply connected to her. We started talking about feelings, and it led to something bigger. And I know it's wrong." Dr. Grant listened attentively, realizing that Daniel felt confused and guilty. "You feel trapped in this relationship," Dr. Grant said, trying to respond with empathy. "What makes you feel so attached to this relationship, even though you know it's not right?" Daniel took a deep breath, as if trying to find the right words. "I can't stay away. Every time I try to stop communicating, she contacts me again. I know it's wrong, but every time we talk, I feel like she's the only one who really listens to me. It's like there's a strong emotional connection between us." Dr. Grant nodded slowly, giving Daniel space to continue opening up. "What do you know about this woman? What makes you feel so connected to her?" Daniel paused for a moment, deep in thought. "Her name is Jessica. She feels lonely in her marriage. She says her husband never really listens to her. She never complains about her husband, but I can sense that something is missing in her life. We talk about it a lot. I think that's what brings us closer together." Dr. Grant noted several very important things in Daniel's statement. Often, relationships that develop like this arise from loneliness or a lack of attention in everyday life. However, behind those feelings, there are many complications that can cause damage. "What do you hope will happen with this relationship?" Dr. Grant asked gently, trying to understand further. Daniel looked at him, then shook his head. "I know this is wrong. I know I have to stop everything, but I feel trapped. We can't stop communicating. Every time I think about ending this relationship, he makes me feel needed again. I think I'm afraid that if I stop, I will lose something important in my life." Dr. Grant looked at Daniel with empathy, understanding the depth of the emotional struggle his patient was experiencing. However, behind all this, there was an awareness that Daniel was struggling against the urge to stay connected to someone who might bring him more confusion than happiness. "Daniel," said Dr. Grant, "I understand how you feel. This is not an easy thing to deal with, especially when you feel so connected to someone. But we have to start looking for ways to understand what you are really looking for in this relationship. What do you feel is missing in your life that has you entangled in this relationship?" Daniel lowered his head, trying to hold back the tears that were welling up. "I don't know," he replied, his voice breaking. "I just feel like I feel unappreciated in my life. At work, at home, everywhere." Dr. Grant felt that this was the right moment to take the therapy session in a deeper direction. Sometimes we look for things outside ourselves to fill the void within. Maybe you're looking for recognition or attention that you feel you're not getting elsewhere. But we have to be careful, because relationships like this can cause a lot of damage to ourselves and others. Daniel sat silently, thinking about Dr. Grant's words. In those few seconds, the atmosphere felt very heavy, and Dr. Grant knew that this was only the beginning of the long journey Daniel had to take. However, he felt optimistic that with the right steps, Daniel could find a way out of his confusion. "What should I do?" Daniel finally asked, looking at Dr. Grant with hope. We'll start by understanding yourself more deeply, Dr. Grant replied calmly. We'll explore why you feel trapped and find ways to free yourself from this relationship in a healthy way. Daniel nodded, feeling a little lighter for the first time in weeks. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of the emptiness he felt. After several weeks of therapy sessions, Daniel began to open up more deeply. Each meeting felt like a small step toward greater self-understanding. Dr. Grant always tried to give Daniel space to talk, without forcing anything. Every time Daniel came, he brought a burden that felt lighter, even if only slightly. However, this journey was still far from over. At the next meeting, Daniel arrived with a slightly calmer expression, although there was still tension on his face. He sat in his usual chair, his arms crossed in front of his chest, a sign that he was trying to protect himself from the outside world. However, that day, something was different, a decision he had just made. I feel a little better, Daniel said softly, his voice calmer than before. I'm starting to understand a little better why I'm stuck in this relationship. But still, I can't stop thinking about Jessica. Dr. Grant looked at him attentively, pausing for Daniel to continue. What do you think about Jessica now, Daniel? Asked Dr. Grant, trying to understand the change in his patient's feelings. Daniel sighed deeply. I feel sorry for her. She's lonely, and I think she feels like her life is empty. But I'm starting to see that I feel that way too. I feel like she's the only one who understands me, the only one who really listens to me. So, you feel connected to her because she gives you the attention you feel you lack elsewhere? Dr. Grant asked, trying to dig deeper. Daniel nodded. Yes, that's right. And I know it's wrong. I know I have to stop this. But the more I talk to him, the more I feel like I can't let him go. It makes me feel important, like I have a place in someone's life. Dr. Grant looked at Daniel with empathy, understanding how great the need for attention and recognition is in a person's life. It's important to remember, Daniel, that we all have emotional needs. We want to feel valued, heard, and accepted. But we also have to be careful that those needs don't trap us in relationships that can ruin our lives. Daniel looked down, as if pondering Dr. Grant's words. But how can I stop this? He asked doubtfully. I've tried, but I always go back to her. Dr. Grant took a deep breath. Perhaps what you need is to understand yourself more deeply. What are you really looking for in this relationship? What is missing in your life that makes you feel the need to continue being involved in it? Daniel was silent for a moment, trying to dig deeper into himself. I want to feel needed. At home, I feel neglected. At work, I don't feel appreciated. But with Jessica, I feel like I have a place. I feel like I have meaning. Dr. Grant nodded slowly, digesting Daniel's answer. Maybe there's a part of you that feels empty and is looking for a way to fill it. But, as we discussed earlier, we have to be careful in how we seek that fulfillment. Sometimes we seek attention from others, but that doesn't always give us the peace or happiness we hope for. Daniel looked at Dr. Grant, looking a little confused, but there was a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. So, you want me to end this relationship? Daniel asked hesitantly. Dr. Grant nodded slowly. No, Daniel, I can't make that decision for you, but I can help you see what is really going on inside you. We will work together to understand what you are looking for and how to fulfill your emotional needs in a healthy way. Daniel bit his lip, looking deep in thought. I feel confused. I want to stop, but I feel too attached, he said, his voice full of confusion. Dr. Grant leaned forward slightly, trying to explain further. Love and relationships can be very confusing, Daniel. But sometimes we have to learn to let go of what we think we need and learn to find peace within ourselves. It will be a long journey, and you are not alone in this. Daniel nodded, though the confusion was still visible on his face. I want to try, Dr. Grant. I want to understand myself better, but I don't know how. Dr. Grant smiled, trying to offer positive encouragement. That's a very good first step, Daniel. We'll start by getting to know yourself better, and from there, we can build a stronger foundation for your future. There are no shortcuts, but I believe you can get through this. The session continued with further discussion about how Daniel could begin to recognize his emotional patterns and how he could start to change his perspective on relationships and himself. Every sentence Dr. Grant uttered provided a little enlightenment, even though there was still a long way to go. As the session ended, Daniel felt a little lighter. Although he knew his journey had only just begun, a new hope was beginning to grow within him. He realized that in order to end the relationship that had trapped him, he must first find peace within himself. Several weeks passed, and the therapy sessions with Daniel continued. Dr. Grant began to see greater changes in his patient. Daniel began to open up more, began to understand what had trapped him in that secret relationship, and began to accept the reality that his feelings of loneliness and emotional needs could not be fulfilled in the wrong way. However, there was still much work to be done to free Daniel from his dependence on Jessica. That day, Daniel came to the therapy session with a slightly different expression. He seemed calmer, although there was a hint of anxiety on his face. Dr. Grant greeted him with a small smile, signaling that he was ready to listen to what Daniel had to share that day. "I feel like there's something I need to get off my chest, Dr. Grant," Daniel said, his voice trembling slightly. "I think this is the right time to tell you." Dr. Grant nodded slowly, giving Daniel space to speak. "Whatever it is, Daniel, you are here to express what you feel." Daniel took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. I've started to think more clearly about my relationship with Jessica, and I know I have to end it. But there's something I've never told you before, something I feel I must reveal now. Dr. Grant looked at him, giving him his full attention. "What is it, Daniel?" Daniel looked down for a moment, trying to find the right words. "I've known Jessica for a long time. Before, I didn't know who she was, but I've just realized that she's your wife, Dr. Grant." Those words hit Dr. Grant like a bolt of lightning. He was silent for a moment, trying to process the information he had just received. His body felt stiff, and his eyes widened in shock. What are you saying?" he asked softly, almost unable to believe what he had just heard. Daniel bowed his head in shame. "I know this is difficult for you to accept, but I felt I had to tell her. Jessica and I never talked about who you were, and I didn't know who you really were until recently. When I heard her full name, I realized she was your wife. I feel devastated, Dr. Grant. I don't know what to do." Dr. Grant remained silent, trying to calm his turbulent thoughts. He felt shocked, angry, and confused all at once. Suddenly, the whole world seemed to spin around him, and he felt like he had lost his footing. However, as a professional, Dr. Grant knew he had to remain calm, even though his heart felt broken. "Daniel," Dr. Grant's voice was hoarse, trying to control his emotions. "Do you know how deep this betrayal is? Not only did you involve yourself in a wrong relationship, but you also involved me in a very personal way. I feel deeply betrayed." Daniel looked down, feeling ashamed of his confession. "I know I've made a huge mistake. I'm so sorry, Dr. Grant. I don't know what to do. I feel trapped in my feelings, and I know I have to end it all. But I also feel so confused. I feel so guilty." Dr. Grant took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. "This isn't just about you, Daniel. It's also about me, about Jessica, and about my integrity as a therapist. I have to face it, even though it's very painful. I feel devastated by what you just said." They both sat in silence for a few minutes, while Dr. Grant tried to control his chaotic feelings. Everything he had built in his life, both personally and professionally, was suddenly threatened. He felt devastated, and a feeling of helplessness began to envelop him. However, he also knew that he had to find a way to deal with it, to maintain his professional integrity. "Daniel," Dr. Grant finally said in a calmer voice, although it still sounded sad, "this is a very difficult situation for both of us. I don't know what will happen after this, but I have to find a way to resolve it in the best way possible. Not just for me, but for you, Jessica, and of course for yourself." Daniel looked at him with regret in his eyes. "I want to fix everything, Dr. Grant. I know it will be difficult, but I am willing to change my life." Dr. Grant looked at him with a heavy heart. "The first step is to understand how deep the consequences of our actions are. You've acknowledged your mistake, Daniel, and that's a good start. But we need to go further to heal this wound." They continued their conversation with heavy hearts. Dr. Grant knew that his journey with Daniel had only just begun, and although he felt devastated by this betrayal, he was determined to help his patient. However, what was more important was how Dr. Grant would deal with the fact that he now had to face him not only as a therapist, but also as a betrayed husband. The days following the revelation felt like a thick fog enveloping Dr. Grant's life. Every step he took, every meeting with a patient, even every breath he took, felt heavier than usual. He began to feel the effects of the betrayal he had experienced, not only in his personal life, but also in his professional career. The decisions made by Jessica and Daniel not only destroyed their relationship, but also threatened the foundation he had built over many years as a therapist. After his last meeting with Daniel, Dr. Grant felt his personal world shaken. The trust he had in his wife, Jessica, collapsed just like that. He felt as if the world he had known all this time was just an illusion, and he didn't know how to move forward. On that dark night, Dr. Grant sat alone in his office, staring at the family photos hanging on the wall. The photos that were once full of beautiful memories now felt like mere shadows of a lost past. All the love that once bound him to Jessica seemed to have been erased. He felt trapped in his own confusion, not knowing what to do. Then a soft sound came from the door. Jessica entered the study with slow steps, her face full of regret. Their eyes met, but no words came out of Dr. Grant's mouth. There was no boiling anger, only silence that permeated every second. "Thomas," Jessica finally spoke, "I know what happened has destroyed you. I'm so sorry. I know I've done something unforgivable." Dr. Grant stared at her silently, trying to digest those words, but his heart still felt frozen. "Why?" said Dr. Grant, his voice barely audible. "Why did you do it?" "I always try to be a good husband." Jessica looked down, her voice hoarse. "I felt lonely. I felt like I was no longer appreciated at home. I know it's not a good excuse, but that's how I felt. Daniel, he gave me the attention I needed, something that had been missing in my life for a long time. I don't know how I got so deeply involved." Dr. Grant felt a great shock within himself. Loneliness. That was the word that came out of Jessica's mouth, and it seemed to be the reason behind everything. All this time, he had never realized how deeply his wife felt lonely. He had been too focused on his work, too busy helping others, that he had neglected the most important person in his life. Now, he had to face that bitter reality. "So, you got involved in that relationship, knowing it was wrong, just because you felt neglected?" Dr. Grant asked flatly. Jessica nodded, tears beginning to roll down her cheeks. "I know it wasn't right, Thomas, but I felt trapped. I didn't know what to do. I just wanted to feel loved again." Dr. Grant took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. All kinds of feelings were mixed up in his heart. Anger, hurt, confusion. However, behind all that, there was a reality he had to face. Jessica, his wife of many years, was also a human being with her own vulnerabilities. Although this betrayal was painful, he couldn't ignore the fact that they both had faults in their relationship. "Jessica," Dr. Grant finally said, his voice softer, "I don't know what we should do now. I feel like everything is falling apart. I feel betrayed by both of you, but I also know we need to talk about this more deeply. We need to figure out how we got to this point." Jessica nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm ready to talk, Thomas. I know this will be very difficult, but I want to fix it. I want us to find a way out together." They sat together in the room, without saying another word. Only silence hung between them, as if every passing second deepened the existing wounds. But in that silence, there was a starting point to resolve everything. Dr. Grant knew that the journey to heal these wounds would not be easy, but he had to begin. Both he and Jessica had to face reality, fix what could be fixed, and find a way to move on. Meanwhile, Dr. Grant had to face another reality, Daniel's lawsuit. After the shocking revelation, Daniel sued him for breach of therapy confidentiality, accusing Dr. Grant of neglecting the basic principles of professional ethics by allowing this inappropriate relationship to develop. The lawsuit adds to the burden Dr. Grant must bear, and he feels his professional world is beginning to crumble. Every night, he reflected on what he must do to turn things around, not only for himself, but for the damaged relationship, for his threatened career, and for Jessica, who now felt so guilty. However, as time passed, Dr. Grant realized that even though the wound was deep, he had to try to begin healing, even if it meant walking a path full of challenges. A week after the shocking revelation, Dr. Grant's life felt more and more like a storm he couldn't control. Every day, he woke up with feelings of anxiety and uncertainty that increasingly gnawed at him. He felt trapped in a never-ending cycle of problems. His divorce from Jessica, Daniel's lawsuit, and his now tarnished reputation as a therapist. At that time, Dr. Grant received an official letter from Daniel's lawyer stating that Daniel was suing him for breach of therapy confidentiality. The letter stated that Dr. Grant had violated the therapist's code of ethics by allowing the relationship between Daniel and Jessica to develop without adequate intervention. Daniel accused Dr. Grant of neglecting the principles of confidentiality that should be protected in every therapy session, and as a result, their relationship had become increasingly complicated. Dr. Grant stared at the letter with mixed feelings. On the one hand, he felt frustrated and angry about the lawsuit, but on the other hand, he knew that there was some truth to Daniel's accusations. As a therapist, Dr. Grant should not have allowed the boundaries of professionalism to be violated. He felt that he had failed in the role he was supposed to hold with integrity. That night, Dr. Grant sat in his office, staring at the pile of legal documents that now weighed even heavier on his mind. Jessica also felt devastated by the lawsuit. Although she knew she was part of a bigger problem, she felt guilty for allowing the relationship to develop without thinking it through. As a wife, she felt very ashamed and didn't know what to do. One anxious night, Jessica came to see Dr. Grant at their now empty house, a place that was once filled with happy memories of the two of them. She wanted to talk again, this time not only about her betrayal, but also about their future. "Thomas, I don't know where to start," Jessica said with a trembling voice. "I know I've hurt us both in a way that can't be forgiven, and I'm so sorry. But I'm also afraid of what's happening now. The lawsuit. I don't know how we can get out of this." Dr. Grant looked at her, his face tired, his eyes full of emotional exhaustion. "Jessica," he said softly, "we've reached this point because we both failed. I failed to maintain my professional boundaries, and you failed to keep our commitment. Now we have to face this reality, not only in our lives, but also in my professional world as a therapist." Jessica cried softly, lowering her head. "I know I've ruined everything, Thomas. I can't turn back time, but I'll do anything to make this right. I don't want us to end up like this. I want to fix everything, even though I know it will be very difficult." Dr. Grant took a deep breath. "I don't know how we can fix this, Jessica. This isn't just about the two of us anymore. It's about the integrity I've built up over the years in my profession. If this lawsuit goes ahead, I could lose my license as a therapist. Not only that, my reputation in the professional world will be destroyed. I have to face the consequences of what has happened, and I feel completely broken." They sat in silence, realizing that despite their regret, there were too many wounds that needed to be healed. However, in that silence, they knew they couldn't continue to avoid reality. Their lives had changed, and they had to find a way to deal with it, even if it meant going through a very painful process. A few days later, Dr. Grant received news that the court had scheduled the first hearing for the case involving him. The summons came with terrifying clarity. This lawsuit would be a turning point in his life. Dr. Grant knew that whatever happened in court, he had to be prepared to face that bitter reality. Meanwhile, Daniel, who now felt more confident about his lawsuit, showed no signs of backing down. He felt that what Dr. Grant had done was a serious offense, and he wanted justice to be served. Although part of him felt guilty, he felt that Dr. Grant's actions had ruined his life, and he was determined to continue with the legal process. Dr. Grant tries to stay focused on his work, even though it is difficult to concentrate. Every time he sees a patient, his mind wanders to his personal problems. He feels increasingly trapped in this cycle and finds it difficult to find a way out. Although he wants to continue helping others, he knows that his personal problems will always follow him. In his next therapy session with a patient, Dr. Grant felt increasingly alienated from the world he once prided himself on. How could he give advice to others when he himself couldn't overcome the problems in his own life? The days passed after the tense first hearing. Dr. Grant felt like his life was in a worse state than he had ever imagined. Every step he took, both in his personal and professional life, felt heavy and full of consequences. The upcoming hearing was drawing closer, and uncertainty increasingly haunted his thoughts. On the one hand, he felt trapped by his own failure, but on the other, he knew he had to find a way to get back up. One rainy afternoon, Dr. Grant decided to take a drastic step. He decided to take a long leave of absence from his therapy practice, something he had never considered before. He felt trapped in the role he played, and found it difficult to continue working as a therapist when his personal problems were so great and unsettling. He needed time to reset his mind, to rediscover meaning in his life. After several days of reflection, Dr. Grant decided to take a trip. He went to a small village far from the hustle and bustle of the city, a place where he could find peace and space to think. There, amidst the silence of nature, he began to understand how important it was to give himself space. Sometimes, to find a way out, we have to pause for a moment and look at the world from a different perspective. In the village, Dr. Grant met an elderly man who had lived a long life and possessed deep wisdom. The man's name was Elias, a farmer who lived alone on the outskirts of the village. Elias invited Dr. Grant to stay at his house, and over several nights, they talked about life, mistakes, and redemption. Elias did not give direct advice, but the stories he shared about his own life journey gave Dr. Grant a new perspective. "I have failed more than once," Elias said calmly one night. "I have lost everything, my family, my job, my self-respect. But I learned that life never ends with a single failure. It's just part of a long journey." Dr. Grant listened intently. "How were you able to get back up after losing everything?" he asked, his voice full of curiosity. Elias smiled slightly, his eyes full of wisdom. "I started by accepting reality. I stopped looking for reasons outside myself and started looking within. I learned to make peace with my mistakes and find ways to fix them. Nothing can go back to the way it was, but we can find peace in accepting the past and designing a better future." Those words struck Dr. Grant's heart. For the first time in months, he felt a little peace within himself. Elias didn't give easy answers, but he taught that redemption begins with accepting mistakes and taking small steps to correct them. Dr. Grant began to realize that even though he couldn't change the past, he could still influence his future. After a few weeks, Dr. Grant returned to the city with a new understanding of himself. He knew that the challenges he faced were not over, but he felt better prepared to face them. He began to make plans for his next court hearing, and also reconsidered whether he wanted to continue his therapy practice. He knew that he had to face the consequences of his actions, but he also knew that he couldn't continue to be trapped in regret. At home, Jessica tried to get closer to him again. They talked more openly about their feelings and tried to find a way to repair their relationship. However, despite the remorse on both sides, Dr. Grant knew that not all wounds could be healed just like that. He decided to move on with his life, trying to find peace, even if it meant facing the bitter truth about his ended marriage. However, there was one thing Dr. Grant couldn't forget: how his life as a therapist had been threatened. His reputation, which he had built over many years, was now at risk because of his personal mistakes that had been exposed. He decided to talk to the authorities to deal with the legal charges and find a way to keep his license safe. Although difficult, Dr. Grant begins to feel that this journey of recovery is not only about himself, but also about setting an example for the patients he has helped. If he can rise up after all that has happened, perhaps it can give hope to those who feel trapped in their mistakes and guilt. In the midst of this journey, Dr. Grant wrote a book about his life experiences, about betrayal, regret, and the search for new meaning in life. This book is not only for himself, but also for others who feel trapped in their mistakes. He hopes to teach that even if we fall, we still have the opportunity to get back up and start again. When the book was published, Dr. Grant felt that he had found a deeper peace. He did not know what would happen at the next hearing, but he knew that he had tried to improve himself. With all his shortcomings, he accepted that this journey was an inevitable part of his life.